Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. My name's Katie and I upload book-related videos every single Wednesday, and a few days ago I asked you guys on Twitter, I polled you for which video you guys wanted to see next, and just across the board everyone wanted to see me do a Psych-Pop video on 13 Reasons Why. So if you don't know what my Psych-Pop videos are, they're just quick videos on psychology. I love psychology just as much, or even, well, I shouldn't say more, but I love psychology just as much as I love books. My bachelor's degree is in psychology and I'm currently finishing up grad school in psych, just like 2 or 3 weeks left. I do of course want to point out that we are going to be talking about suicide in this video, so if that's a trigger for you, I just want to be very upfront about that. I am going to go ahead and put some helpful links down below, the Suicide Prevention Lifeline as well as the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI. It's about reducing stigma surrounding mental illness. You can also contact them if you're looking for support groups. During undergrad I used to volunteer and do the helpline there, so just I highly recommend checking that organization out. I do of course want to put the disclaimer out there that I am not a clinical psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. Even what I'm studying right now in grad school is more so psychology in the workplace, so I'm not an expert. I just love talking about psychology and I have some background in it. And also in terms of spoilers for 13 Reasons Why, I'm not going to be talking actually that much about the show itself. I'm going to be talking much more so about showing suicide in media and some of the research that talks about the effects of that. So if you're worried about spoilers for the show, really all I'm talking about is Hannah's suicide. I'm not going to show it, obviously, or even describe it in any of kind of, extreme detail, because if I did, that'd end up being very hypocritical to the point I'm trying to make in this video. But anyway, the way I'm going to structure this video is I'm going to get into the sort of pros, or I guess I should say the reasoning behind why the writer of the show said that he wanted to show the suicide, and why some people are happy the show showed the suicide. Then I'm going to get into what some of the research said and why a lot of psychologists and researchers say that you should definitely not depict suicide in media, and then I'm going to get into my opinions. So getting into some of the reasoning behind why a lot of people are happy they showed the suicide scene when a lot of shows would have just glossed over it. A lot of people have said that by showing this suicide scene, it's kind of depicting the reality of what suicide actually looks like, so that people, a lot of people have this kind of fuzzy image in their mind and maybe it's more so idealized from what it's actually like. So by showing the reality of it, I guess the show was going to try and kind of prevent people from actually doing it. So the writer of the show is Nick Sheff, and this is why he said he wanted to show the suicide. So he said, "From the very beginning I agreed that we should depict the suicide with as much detail and accuracy as possible. I even argued for it, relating the story of my own suicide attempt to that of others." So essentially I'll link the article down below, but he essentially describes how he was going to commit suicide, but then he heard this woman's very graphic story of how she attempted suicide, and so hearing her story in such detail kept him from going forth with his suicide. So when it came time to discuss the portrayal of the protagonist's suicide in 13 Reasons Why, I of course immediately flashed to my own experience. Now let's get into the cons of depicting it and kind of some of the research. So one of the main issues here, and this I do completely agree with, is that by showing the suicide, you're essentially showing people how to do it. Now I'm not going to get into any kind of detail because, as I said, then I'd be being very hypocritical here, but to keep this quick and to the point, a lot of people are essentially worried that by showing Hannah's suicide, it's going to essentially decrease the number of attempted suicides and increase the number of successful suicides. There's also the issue of suicide contagion or clusters. I know I heard about this happening at the university I'm at right now, but it essentially describes when exposure to suicide within a family or within a group of friends or through media may be associated with an increase in suicidal behaviors, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So I know, as I said, this happened at my university. One person committed suicide, and then numerous individuals quite quickly within the months after committed suicide as well. So a lot of people are concerned that this show is going to act as a contagion for more people to commit suicide. Then Kristen Douglas, who is the national manager at Youth Mental Health Foundation called Headspace, is very, very against what 13 Reasons Why did, and she said, national and international research clearly indicates the very real impact and risk to harmful suicide exposure, leading to increased risk and possible suicide contagion. She added that research shows that if you talk about suicide harmfully, it will lead to further harm. It's far more likely for young people to connect with this content and think it's the answer for them. So that's what essentially researchers are saying shocking. So now I'm gonna get into my own opinions and kind of how I reacted to it. So initially, I will admit, when I first saw the suicide scene, I had the reaction that Nick Sheff is talking about for why he wanted to depict it. I had never seen something like this in TV before, so suddenly the reality of it definitely sunk into me. I felt nauseous, and it really had a huge impact on me and made me think much more so about the fact of how my actions might be negatively impacting other people, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally. However, then I started to read more about the actual research behind this, and then my opinions shifted. And I think that's the key here. My reaction was initially like Nick Sheff, where I was just thinking about myself and my own reactions and how it impacted me. I wasn't thinking about how the research says this would impact others. And I just want to be clear here, I'm not trying to minimize what Nick Sheff went through or to villainize him whatsoever, but it just feels to me, and when you hear about him describing why he wanted to depict it in the show, he's never once mentioning the research or the researchers who contacted him and told him what the ramifications of this might be. He was just very focused on his own personal experience, which I'm not saying his own personal experience with suicide was not valid, but I'm just saying that was just one person's singular experience. It just seems his head was very focused on the fact that I heard about someone committing suicide and that kept me from committing suicide. So I'm sure that'll be the case for everyone else watching this show, when the research says exactly the opposite of that. And this is the part I get really confused by, and I don't know if this part is true or not, but I've heard experts that many experts and organizations reached out to the show and said, do not depict it because of this suicide contagion effect, because you're essentially showing people how to commit suicide, and which I just find mind-boggling. You know, why wouldn't you base your decisions off research that's taking into account how thousands of people might react to suicide that research has shown, and instead you're taking into account only kind of this one person's view. Another issue I had, and this isn't something that I've seen like from the research, this is just my personal opinion, but I think if the goal was you're trying to kind of show how graphic and painful suicide would be, and so that would prevent people from doing it, I don't know why they made it such a, and I know this is gonna sound really strange, so before you downvote and comment, just hear me out. I know when Hannah is actually committing suicide, it's very graphic, but the aftermath of this beautiful young woman kind of floating in water, and I just don't understand why they wouldn't have done something like, say, having her hang herself. And this next part, it's gonna sound very gross, but that's the point, and showing her face, you know, bloated and contorted at the aftermath. I think that would have been much more impactful if you're trying to prevent someone from doing it than having this kind of, as strange as this sounds, kind of pretty imagery. Those are all of my thoughts. Overall, I do want to say I do think it was an excellent show. I thought it handled a lot of other very difficult topics like sexual assault very well, but it's just this one aspect of kind of showcasing the suicide that I had issues with. And I do realize I'm being a bit of a hypocrite since I'm talking about how suicide contagion can be linked to increased suicides, and here I am making a video about suicide. I understand that in a sense that's slightly hypocritical. So please let me know your thoughts on all of this. I would be super interested to hear them, and I'll see you guys soon.